Hi everyone, hope you're having a good week. Well, better week than last week. If you remember, last week we heard in Chaye Sarah that Yitzhak and Rivka got married. And opening 9 in this week's Sedra, Parshas Toldos, is Eile Toldos Yitzhak. These are the generations of Yitzhak. And then all it says is Avram gave birth to Yitzhak. So Rashi explains who are these generations. He answers Yaakov and Esav. Shkoyach Rashi, we knew that already. So what's Rashi adding? We're just about to read about the birth of Yaakov and Esav anyway. So what's he adding by telling us that the generations of Yitzchak are Yaakov and Esav? So let's go a bit further into the story, see what happens next. We know that Yitzchak and Rivka were married for 20 years and they unfortunately weren't blessed with children, they were infertile. And they both prayed to Hashem and eventually their prayers were answered. Rivka became pregnant. But she was having these funny, weird pregnancy symptoms and she could feel a big pull in her stomach when going past a yeshiva, the yeshiva of Shem and Eva. And she also felt a big pull when going past places of idol worship. So she was very confused, but there was no sonographer living nearby, so she did the next best thing and she asked her rabbi, she asked Shem. He told her that it wasn't just one child, but that she was expecting twins who had very different personalities. One was being pulled towards idol worship and one towards Hashem. And then finally they're born, Mazel Tov, 2 boys. We flash forward to a time when the twins are 15 years old. The Pasuk says that Yaakov Avinu was cooking lentil soup, which just goes to show that even at that time, when men and women had much more clearly defined roles than they do now, even Yaakov Avinu was not too busy learning to find time to help his mother in the kitchen. So men, there are no excuses. Get in the kitchen. The Gemara in Bava Basra Yud Zayin explains that Avram Avinu had died that day and Yaakov was cooking soup for his father Yitzchak, who was in mourning. At this point, Esau comes in from the field and he demands this red stuff, he calls it, that his brother is making because he's dying of hunger. That's how he puts it. Yaakov, he sees an opportunity here and he makes a deal with Esau. He says to him, I'll give you the soup if you give up the right to your status as firstborn, if you give up your birthright. And the Gemara explains on that day, Esau committed 5 sins. Whilst he was out in the field, he slept with a girl who was betrothed to somebody else. That was Aveira number 1. He murdered somebody. He denied God's existence. He denied the belief in the resurrection of the dead, and he gave up his birthrights. That was all in one day. And that's in stark contrast to Yaakov, who spent the day looking after his parents in the midst of a family crisis and claiming his birthright. So it begs the question. They were so young at this point, they're only 15 years old, but you can already see how strongly each one is committed to his own way of life. But they're twins. It's the same nature, the same nurture. How did they turn out so differently? The Gemara in Sukkah says, the greater a person is, the greater his evil inclination. And this implies 2 things. Firstly, if you see a truly great person, you should know that he or she has wrestled with demons more ominous and more powerful than anything you've ever had to deal with. But secondly, and most importantly, if you see someone who is sunk to depths which you cannot even fathom, you should know that this person is blessed with equally unfathomable potential. And this, says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, is actually the deeper meaning behind Rashi's comment that Yaakov and Esav are the generations of Yitzchak. The standard explanation that lots of Mepharshim give is that in the Torah the word Toldos can have several meanings. It can mean children, descendants, but it can also mean products and deeds, all of which are generated by a person. Since the account of Yaakov and Esau's birth doesn't immediately follow the Parsha's opening verse, Rashi feels a need to tell us that it refers to them, to children, not just deeds. Rashi says, the wicked Esau that we read about is not considered a product of Yitzchak and Rivka, but rather he's a sinner of his own making. It's not down to them, they didn't do anything wrong. And still, the Torah considers him a descendant. He's still included in Yitzchak's list of descendants, because Esau is a man of great potential for good. As great as the evil he allowed himself to succumb to, and there's always the potential for change. To include him tells an Esau, look at what you still could be. And to the rest of us reading it, it says, if all you see when you look at someone is an Esau, then look again, see their potential. It's really important to remember that people are just people. We're human beings and we make choices. Don't beat yourself up about other people's choices, even your own children's, because even a couple as great as Rivka and Yitzchak had a very much off the derech kid, and the Torah doesn't judge them for that. Instead, it celebrates how they treated him. They didn't reject him, they still loved him and they kept him close, he lived with them, they included him in the blessings, and he was very much a part of their household. They weren't sitting shiva for him, they didn't chuck him out the house. Thank God, of course, none of our children is an Esav, but they might not be a Yaakov Avinu just yet either. Hang in there. We can't push kids away or get upset if they don't fit in the same box that we ourselves find ourselves in. There are lots of boxes and there are lots of paths, lots of different ways to connect to Hashem and to Judaism. It's not one size fits all. It's not that they're doing it wrong and we're doing it right. Every individual, each of us, has to find their own way that works for them. And our only job is to love them. Children need to be able to make their own life choices and know that our love as parents, as teachers, and as their community is unconditional, as is the love of Hashem for them. His love isn't dependent on them keeping mitzvahs. The mitzvahs are always there. They're a constant opportunity to better our relationship with Hashem. But having a relationship with Hashem and the love of Hashem, the love that Hashem has for us, doesn't rely on us keeping those mitzvahs. He's always there whenever we're ready. I feel like this story is included in the Torah so that when we struggle with our kids or get upset about the choices they're made, we can know that it's okay, it's normal, and it's a guide as to how we can deal with it. So what can we actually do for them? The Torah knew that we were going to be busy, that we'll have jobs and we'll have other time pressures, but it gives amazing advice on how to bring up children. It's funny, it's a piece of davening that we know back to front, we say it so often, a few times a day even, but this week for the first time another meaning jumped out at me. Shema is part of Moshe's final speech he gives the Jewish people before he dies, where he imparts loads of advice to them. One night this week, my husband Nathan and I had been talking about how life's just so busy and how it feels like there isn't time to fit in anything meaningful. We're just rushing around from one thing to the next. And the very next morning, I was davening, and I read to myself, "V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol moedecha," the words we know really well, that you should love Hashem with everything you have. This is actually one of the 6 constant mitzvahs. It's an opportunity that you constantly have all day long to be thinking about how much you love Hashem. But how do we practically fulfill it? And as I was reading it, it just suddenly clicked for me. I think it means that if your heart and soul are full of love for Hashem, it doesn't mean you have to be saying it all day long, but everything you do will be a testimony to this. Your behaviour everywhere, at work, at home, at shul, in public, in private, it will be obvious to everyone around, and especially to your children, how important Torah and mitzvahs are to you. And the Shema carries on. It says, "V'hayu hadvarim ha'ela asher anachim etzavcha hayam al levavecha," that the Torah and mitzvahs that we've been given should be on your heart. But it goes on to say to us, don't just keep it internal, not just in your heart. V'shinan tom levanecha, you should teach it to your children. V'dibarta bom, and actually speak to them about it. Don't just keep it to yourself, you have to talk about it. But how can we do this when we're all so busy? So it carries on. V'shiftecha b'oisecha, when you're sitting around your house. V'lechtecha v'derech, when you're driving your kids around, or you're on your way to school, or taking them to football or to ballet. V'shachbacha, when you lie down, when you're putting them to bed at night. V'kumecha, when they get up in the morning, when you're giving them breakfast. Fit that conversation around everything else that you do. It should be a running commentary throughout your life. Keep the lines of communication open. Your kids should be able to ask you anything, to talk about anything. You want to be their go-to person so that you can guide them. If we shut them down or we make things taboo, like they feel like they can't talk to us about them, they're not going to want to talk to us because they'll be worried about being rejected or being judged. And that's the message of this Sedra. Don't blame yourself for your children's choices. Love your children unconditionally and keep them close to you. Keep talking to them. And let that Torah discussion be the narrative that accompanies them throughout their lives. I hope you have a really good week and keep well, keep healthy, keep safe, and have a very good Shabbos.